through. The deal does not include anything about Iran's American captives. That's a sensitive point that Republicans have seized upon during this election season. Democrats, some Democrats as well. With us is one Michigan Democrat, Congressman Dan Kildee, has lobbied for years for the release of one of his constituents, the former U.S. Marine Amir Hekmati. Hekmati has spent 3 years in an Iranian jail on espionage charges. Congressman, thanks very much for yes, you voted for the Iran nuclear deal. It now looks like that part of this is over with, at least for now. So does that open the door or close the door to Hekmati and the 3 other Americans being released by Iran?
Well, I think it creates a much greater likelihood that we can continue to bring Iran slowly back to the international community. And one, of course, tangible demonstration of that would be for them to release these Americans. I really hate to think what the fate of these Americans might have been had the Republicans prevailed in their attempt to try to stop this agreement. It was a dangerous path to not engage this agreement in the first place, just in terms of the effect on the region and I think the effect on global security. But as it relates to these particular Americans who continue to be held, I just can't imagine how we could possibly engage Iran if we would have negotiated an agreement with them and then walked away from it and then expect to try to work with them on the release of these Americans. It would be very, very difficult.
What do you say to the Republican presidential frontrunner, Donald Trump, when he says it's crazy that the administration didn't simply demand the release of these four Americans right at the start and say, you got to release these Americans, then we'll talk about easing the sanctions, $100 billion or whatever, and other aspects. He says this is a disgrace.
Well, you know, Donald says a lot of things. I've always been amused by the things that he has to say. I think when you're actually in a position of authority and leadership where you actually have to exercise real decision-making, we tend to tamp down that kind of rhetoric. It would have been really dangerous for us to attempt to exchange the freedom of these Americans for $100 billion or whatever it is that he might suggest. You know, I would have preferred that the release of these Americans had been a precondition of entering negotiations, and maybe I could agree with Mr. Trump on that particular point. But once we entered negotiations, I think most reasonable people on this question would understand the real danger in exchanging the freedom of innocent Americans for something that we would have to give up at the nuclear negotiating table. We'd have to ask ourselves, what would we give? More nuclear capacity, more money, and what would that do to Iran or some other rogue nation's intentions later on when they can't get something from us? What would they do? Grab some more Americans and try to trade them for something that they otherwise could not secure? That'd be dangerous.
Well, we'll stay in close touch with you, Congressman Kildee. Let's hope that Amir Hekmati and the other Americans are released and released soon, and let's just hope that that does happen. Thanks very much for all the good work you do.
Thank you, Wolf.